On March 17, 2017, Mary Semney was spending her evening like any other teenager. She was at Tim's Corner Cafe in Ridgewood, British Columbia, with her friends. The laughter, the music, and the chatter filled the small cafe as Mary smiled, unaware of the dark fate waiting for her. Mary was born on March 1, 2001. In Ridgewood, a quiet town surrounded by dense forests and cold coastal winds. Her parents, Laura and David Snay, struggled with addiction, and as a result, Mary was raised mainly by her loving grandmother, Grace. Grace became Mary's legal guardian early on, protecting her from the troubles that haunted her parents. Despite hardships, Mary was full of life. She was passionate about music and loved to sing, often changing her hair color and experimenting with wigs to express her creativity. Mary was a happy, free-spirited teenager who loved her friends and dreamed of a bright future. In the summer of 2016, Mary met a man named Stephen Blake at Tim's Corner. Stephen was 53 years old, with a dark past filled with criminal records, including harassment and fraud. But to Mary, Stephen was more than just a stranger. He became like a father figure. Stephen showered her with gifts, dresses, shoes, and even alcohol. He convinced Mary he wanted to adopt her to make up for mistakes with his own daughter Allison, who he claimed had passed away. This was a lie. Allison was alive but estranged from Stephen. Over time, Mary started drifting away from her family and school. She spent more time with Stephen, sometimes staying at his house, but telling Grace she was with friends. As Mary neared 16, she declared she would decide her own future, including who she wanted to live with. Stephen's attempts to adopt Mary were met with suspicion by Grace, who found the man's interest in Mary unsettling. Mary herself refused the adoption just before her 16th birthday, causing tension between her and Stephen. On the night of March 16th, Mary was again at Tim's Corner with friends, including Kyle McKinnon, a young man she was dating. Kyle gave Mary a ride home after midnight, but after that, Stephen was the last person to see her. Days passed with no word from Mary. Her usual online activity stopped abruptly. Grace grew worried and approached the cafe and Mary's friends, learning that Stephen had been asking about Mary there. Both Grace and Stephen filed missing person reports. Police searched the local park, Stephen's house, and nearby lots, but found nothing. Suspicion grew round Stephen because of his criminal record and strange behavior. Mary was described as 5 feet 5 inches tall, with short red hair, lip piercings, and sometimes wore wigs or glasses. Stephen was tall and heavy, with white hair, a beard, and tattoos, including a teardrop under his left eye. Grace publicly accused Stephen of exploiting Mary's vulnerability. She shared letters Stephen wrote to Mary, calling her "my darling birdie." Grace had even warned the police about Stephen months earlier, but was told no action could be taken. In May 2017, police found Mary's body buried in a shallow grave. Items nearby contained Stephen's DNA. The community mourned the loss of a bright, young life cut short. In 2020, Stephen was charged with first-degree murder. During court, it was revealed Stephen admitted to killing Mary during an argument, then hiding her death by impersonating her online. In April 2023, Stephen pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and was sentenced to life in prison with parole eligibility after 20 years. The judge condemned his cruel actions. Mary's family spoke tearfully about their loss and the broken dreams of their daughter. Her story stands as a tragic reminder of trust betrayed and the dangers faced by vulnerable youth. After Mary disappearance shook the quiet town of Ridgewood. Everyone's attention turned to Stephen Blake. Who was this man who suddenly entered Mary's life and cast such a dark shadow over it? The deeper the police dug, the more troubling secrets came to light. Stephen Blake was born in 1964 in a neighboring town. His past was marked with criminal acts, from sexual harassment to fraud and violence throughout the 1980s and 90s. Despite his troubled history, Stephen had managed to stay under the radar for many years. Living alone in a small house on Bruce Street, Mary's grandmother, Grace, had felt uneasy about Stephen from the start. She recalled how Stephen had approached her months before Mary disappeared. Expressing his desire to legally adopt Mary, Grace immediately sensed something wrong and refused, trying to protect her granddaughter. But Stephen's manipulation went deeper than anyone realized. Stephen told Mary a false story, that he wanted to redeem himself after losing his own daughter Allison. This lie helped him gain Mary's trust and affection. He gave her expensive gifts, high-heeled shoes, alcohol, and even tried to isolate her from her family and friends. As Mary got closer to her 16th birthday, she began pushing boundaries. She told Grace she wanted to live independently and with Stephen. Grace tried to intervene, but Mary's rebellious streak grew stronger. Mary's school attendance dropped, and she often stayed out late. Arguments between Mary and Stephen grew tense, especially when Mary rejected his plan to adopt her. On March 16, 2017, Mary was at Tim's Corner Cafe with friends, including Kyle McKinnon, her boyfriend, who gave her a ride home. After that night, Stephen was the last person to see her alive when Mary vanished. Police focused their search around Stephen's home and local parks. They even searched garbage bins in nearby lots, hoping for clues. But Stephen's story was always calm and collected, claiming he was as worried as everyone else. Despite not being named a suspect immediately, the police grew suspicious. Stephen's DNA was later found on items near Mary's shallow grave. Discovered on May 19, 2017, the evidence painted a grim picture. Meanwhile, Stephen tried to cover his tracks. He impersonated Mary through her phone and social media, messaging friends and family for several days after she was gone, creating a cruel illusion that she was still alive. Mary's father, David, was in jail during this time, unable to help. Stephen's own daughter, Allison, said she hadn't spoken to him for years and worried about his mental health. The community mourned deeply. Grace, devastated by her granddaughter's death, spoke out about the need to protect vulnerable young people from predators like Stephen. In court hearings beginning in 2021. Evidence showed Stephen admitted to pushing Mary during an argument, causing her to lose consciousness. Later, he strangled her, ending her life in a brutal act of violence. Stephen was sentenced to life imprisonment with parole eligibility after 20 years. The judge called his crime cowardly and cruel, a betrayal of trust that shattered an innocent life. Mary Smeny's story is a painful reminder that darkness can hide behind friendly faces, and vigilance is needed to protect the most vulnerable among us. Following Stephen Blake's arrest, the small town of Ridgewood struggled to come to terms with the dark truth behind Mary Smeny's disappearance. The shock of betrayal by someone who was supposed to care for her rippled through the community. Yet, the investigation was far from over. Every detail needed to be examined, every secret uncovered. Detectives dived deeper into Stephen's past. They discovered a trail of manipulation and abuse that stretched back decades. Stephen had a history of preying on vulnerable young women, using charm and lies to trap them. But Mary's case was different. It had left a permanent scar on the town's heart. Mary's family and friends began to speak out. Her grandmother, Grace, shared memories of Mary's bright spirit and love for music. How she loved experimenting with wigs and changing her hair color, always expressing herself in her own unique way. They remembered Mary as a joyful, creative girl, full of dreams and hopes. But as the trial approached, harsh realities emerged. Stephen's defense tried to argue that the tragic events were accidental, a fight gone wrong between two troubled souls. However, evidence painted a different picture. Text messages revealed Stephen's obsession and controlling behavior. Witnesses testified about the gifts he lavished on Mary and how he isolated her from her family. The court heard chilling details. After Mary was strangled, Stephen impersonated her on social media to delay the search and suspicion. His cold calculation shocked everyone. Throughout the trial, Mary's family showed immense strength. Her father David, recently released from jail, faced the pain of losing his daughter with raw courage. Her grandmother Grace fought to keep Mary's memory alive. Despite the grief that threatened to overwhelm her, community members rallied to support the family, raising awareness about the dangers young people face from predators. They called for stronger protections and better education to prevent similar tragedies. The judge's final verdict reflected the gravity of the crime. Stephen Blake was found guilty of second-degree murder and sentenced to life imprisonment. He would have to serve at least 20 years before being considered for parole. A sentence meant to bring some justice to Mary's family. The courtroom was heavy with sorrow, but also with hope. Hope that Mary's story would serve as a warning, that her life and death would not be forgotten. Even as the trial ended, questions lingered. Could Mary's death have been prevented if those warnings had been heeded sooner? Could Grace's early suspicions have saved her granddaughter? The community mourned not only Mary, but also the failures that allowed such a tragedy to unfold. Mary Semnai's life, though cut short, continues to inspire those who seek justice for the vulnerable. Her memory is a call to action, to protect, to listen, and to fight against the darkness that hides in plain sight. After the verdict, life in Ridgewood remained heavy with sorrow. Mary Smythe's death had exposed dark secrets, but it also opened the door to uncovering more hidden truths. People started asking questions. How did Stephen Blake manage to gain such control over Mary? Were there others affected by him? Detectives re-examined old cases, talking to women who had crossed paths with Stephen over the years. Slowly, a pattern emerged. Stephen was a master manipulator, using lies and gifts to trap vulnerable young women, often those struggling with family troubles or addiction. Some women had escaped his grasp, but many remained silent, afraid to speak out. Mary's grandmother, Grace, became a quiet warrior for justice. She started meeting with local groups, working to protect teens from predators, and began speaking publicly about Mary's story. Grace's courage inspired others to share their experiences, breaking years of silence. Meanwhile, the media spotlight on the case drew attention to problems in the local child welfare system. It was revealed that Grace's earlier complaints about Stephen had been dismissed by officials who had underestimated the danger he posed. This failure shook the community's trust in those meant to protect its most vulnerable. Mary's friends, once too scared to talk, began opening up about their fears and experiences. They described how Stephen's gifts seemed like kindness, but slowly turned into control and isolation. The realization hit hard. Mary had been trapped in a web of lies. At school, counselors worked harder to support teens facing difficult home lives. Workshops about healthy relationships and online safety became regular. The tragedy had sparked a movement to prevent others from suffering the same fate. Grace continued her fight, meeting with lawmakers to push for stronger laws against exploitation and abuse. She wanted to make sure no other family would have to endure the pain she had lived through. The community's grief turned into action. Memorials were held for Mary, celebrating her creativity and joy. Her story became a symbol of hope, a reminder to stay vigilant and protect the young. Though the pain never fully disappeared, Ridgewood found a way to heal together. The shadows cast by Stephen Blake's crimes slowly lifted, replaced by a determination to build a safer future. Mary Semney's legacy lives on, a young girl whose life touched many, whose story sparked change, and whose memory will never fade. The months after Mary Semney's tragic death brought a wave of unease across Ridgewood. While Stephen Blake was behind bars, the truth about what really happened and who else might be involved was far from settled. Detective Rachel Morgan kept digging. She went through Stephen's old phone records, messages, and contacts. There were strange calls to unknown numbers and secret meetings mentioned in texts. Someone was covering for Stephen, or worse, helping him. Rachel also spoke to Mary's close friends again, carefully piecing together the last days of Mary's life. One name kept coming up: Jacob, a quiet boy from school who rarely talked but had been seen near Tim Hortons the night Mary disappeared. Jacob had a history of being bullied and kept to himself. But was he connected to the crime? Rachel wondered if he was an unwilling witness or a hidden player in the story. Meanwhile, Grace continued her campaign for justice. She met with families of other missing teens in the area and realized that many cases shared similar patterns: disappearing after meeting older men, warnings ignored by authorities, and a trail of silence that stretched too far. The community held vigils and rallies, demanding better protection for their children. New laws were proposed, focusing on stricter background checks for adults working with teens and faster responses to missing persons reports at school. Rumors began swirling about a secret group that Mary and some others had tried to who had fallen prey to exploitation but were too scared to speak publicly. Detective Morgan started looking into this group, uncovering messages and posts on social media hinting at deeper corruption. Was Stephen acting alone, or was there a larger network? The tension grew as the investigation widened. Some people in Ridgewood whispered in fear, while others stood stronger, determined to find the full truth. One late night, Rachel received an anonymous tip: meet at the old park near the river if she wanted answers. Alone and cautious, Rachel went to the park, only to find clues that pointed to someone much closer to the community than she had expected. The hidden shadows of Ridgewood were beginning to unravel, revealing secrets that could change everything. Detective Rachel Morgan knew that the tip she received at the old park was just the beginning. The clues pointed her toward a complex web of secrets that had been hidden beneath Ridgewood's calm surface for years. Mary Semney's death was not just an isolated tragedy. It was connected to something much larger. Rachel spent weeks following leads, talking to people who were scared to speak openly. She met with anonymous sources who described a network that preyed on vulnerable teens, offering them gifts, attention, and false promises. Some of these victims had managed to leave messages hidden in their social media posts, hoping someone would find them. One of these messages was from a girl named Emma, who had disappeared 6 months before Mary. Emma's last posts spoke of feeling trapped and scared, mentioning a man called Mr. Gray who was always watching. Rachel dug into Emma's background and found that many of her online friends had similar fears. Meanwhile, the community was restless. Parents demanded answers, local newspapers published opinion pieces, and city officials promised to act. But some powerful people in Ridgewood resisted. They tried to dismiss the investigation as rumors and hysteria. Rachel realized that to catch those responsible, she had to get inside the group. She started undercover work, using an online profile to connect with teens who might be at risk. It was dangerous and exhausting, but she felt she had no choice. Through these secret conversations, Rachel learned about meetings held in abandoned buildings and private homes. Teens were being manipulated into silence with threats and lies. The more Rachel uncovered, the more she understood how deeply the problem had spread. One night, during a secret meeting with a source who called herself Lily, Rachel received shocking information. Lily claimed that someone from the police force might be protecting parts of the network. This betrayal struck Rachel hard. Could she trust anyone in the department? At the same time, Grace, Mary's mother, continued to push for public awareness. She organized community workshops and spoke at school assemblies, urging young people to be cautious and to speak out. The trial against Stephen Blake was moving slowly. New evidence was emerging, but the defense fought hard to discredit witnesses. Many in the courtroom watched nervously as hidden truths came to light. Rachel's investigation took her to places she never expected: secret documents, hidden phone calls, and quiet meetings in the dead of night. Every step revealed more about the people involved and their methods. In the shadows of Ridgewood, a dangerous game was unfolding, but Rachel was determined to bring the truth into the light, no matter the cost. Detective Rachel Morgan's investigation was reaching a critical point. The deeper she dug into the case surrounding Mary Slenny's murder, the clearer it became that the danger was closer than anyone imagined. The web of lies, deceit, and fear was thickening. Rachel found herself up against unexpected obstacles. Someone within the police department was leaking information, sabotaging leads, and casting doubt on her work. The very people she trusted seemed to be turning their backs. Meanwhile, Stephen Blake's trial took a dark turn. New witnesses stepped forward, speaking of his manipulative behavior toward not only Mary but several other young girls. Each testimony revealed a man who hid behind a mask of kindness while controlling and hurting those around. Rachel felt the weight of the case on her shoulders. Every day brought more pressure from the media, from the public, and from within the force. She began working longer hours, barely sleeping, haunted by the thought that Mary's killer might still be free. A breakthrough came when Rachel discovered encrypted messages on Stephen's old phone, recovered from evidence. The messages hinted at others involved in the network, people who used their power to silence victims and witnesses. Rachel coordinated a risky sting operation to catch those still involved. She teamed up with trusted officers, carefully planning every move to avoid tipping off the suspects. On the night of the operation, the tension was palpable. Undercover officers moved through the shadows of an abandoned warehouse where a meeting was scheduled. Just as the suspects began to gather, police lights flooded the area. Several arrests were made, but Rachel knew this was only the beginning. More layers of corruption and cruelty remained hidden beneath the surface. Back home, Mary's mother, Grace, was struggling to find peace. The pain of losing her daughter was raw, but she refused to give up. She spoke at vigils, met with lawmakers, and inspired a community to demand change. As Rachel pieced together the final parts of the puzzle, she realized that catching Stephen Blake was just one step in a much larger fight. The battle for justice and safety was far from over. Months passed since the police raid, but the echoes of the past still haunted everyone involved in Mary Semney's case. Detective Rachel Morgan was exhausted but determined. There was one last piece missing to close this dark chapter once and for all. New evidence had come to light. Financial records showing large sums of money transferred to an unknown account. Rachel suspected this was the money trail linking Stephen Blake to a wider criminal network that had exploited vulnerable girls for years. The investigation revealed shocking details of manipulation and betrayal. Stephen was not acting alone. Powerful people had protected him and others like him for too long. But Rachel's team was relentless. With each arrest, the truth crept closer to the surface at the same time. Stephen's legal team tried every tactic to delay the trial, but the judge was firm. Justice would not be postponed any longer. Mary's family found some comfort in knowing the truth was finally coming out. Grace, Mary's mother, stood strong at the courthouse every day, her presence a symbol of courage and hope for all victims. On the day of the verdict, the courtroom was packed. The tension was thick as the jury delivered their decision. Stephen Blake was found guilty on multiple charges, including first-degree murder. The judge's sentencing speech was stern and unforgiving. He condemned the cruelty and cowardice of the crime, affirming that no parole would be granted for at least 25 years. As Stephen was led away in handcuffs, a wave of relief swept through the courtroom. Justice had been served, but the scars left behind would take time to heal. Outside, Rachel spoke to the press, urging the community to stay vigilant and support survivors. Mary's story was a painful reminder that predators could hide in plain sight, and that only through collective courage could such darkness be overcome. The final pages of Mary Semney's story were written, but her legacy lived on through the lives she touched, the awareness raised, and the hope that no other family would endure the same tragedy.